Hello, bonjour, and welcome to your new RT1 Exchange video. Welcome to this channel where we taste, explore and explain the wonderful world of wine. This is episode number 6 and our final iteration of our series about the prestigious sparkling wines from the French region of Champagne. So we'll leave, sadly, Champagne for now after this 6th episode about it to move on to more fine and rare wine wonders. We've already discussed so many aspects of Champagne, the grapes, the many different styles, the terroirs, the sweetness levels. If you've watched those 6 episodes, well, first of all, a big thank you, you're very brave, but more importantly, you must be starting to be a real Champagne wine connoisseur, so well done. Now, there is one important aspect that I want to cover here, even though it's pretty broad, and that's what we call the Prestige Cuvees. Those top champagnes, those flagship labels every champagne house and producer makes to really highlight what they do best. And while this is a relatively obvious topic that many can tell you about, I also want to add something extra that very few have in mind, which is that there are even more special champagnes, single vineyard ones, so we will have a word about those as well. Let's get right into it, let's go. First of all, you will quite often read about or hear journalists or wine writers talk about Prestige Cuvees champagnes, even though it doesn't correspond to any official classification or any hand ranking or categorization of the wines. There's no official document or no one can strictly say this is a Prestige Cuvée and this is not. It's just an abstract concept. But what does it mean? What is this concept? It's actually pretty simple. The term Prestige Cuvée could easily, and perhaps it should in fact, be replaced by the term flagship cuvée, because that's really what they are. But I guess the word prestige is more glamorous and mysterious, or it has more mystique than just flagship. But let's demystify it without taking away anything about how good or rare those prestige cuvées are. But prestige cuvées are champagne makers' flagship wines, essentially. It's as simple as that. So what does this mean? Well, every champagne house or grower has vineyards he or she makes wines from. Generally, it's a combination of their own vineyards that they own and crop and grapes they buy from independent growers that they have under contract. Some vineyards yield better grapes than others, and that's reflected, for example, in some villages in Champagne being classified as Premier Cru or Grand Cru. Prestige Cuvées are made from the best vineyards because, of course, they contain and are made by blending the best wines from those vineyards that wineries produce. That's number one. Secondly, champagne makers from these excellent wines to start with try to make as good a champagne as they can using the best of their know-how, or savoir-faire as we call it in French, the best winemaking techniques that they know to craft the best wines that they can. So they often use more fermentation in oak, for example, either in oak barrels or in oak vats. That's more expensive to do, but it usually makes better and more complex wines. They don't hesitate to age their wines a little bit longer to smoothen them, to get more depth out of them, more balance and complexity out of them as well. Even if that's more costly, Prestige Cuvées are worth it. Two important things to have in mind. Prestige Cuvées are quite rare wines, very complex and very balanced because so much care and attention goes into making them. What is particularly interesting about them as well is that they are very different from one another, and that's because different houses use really different winemaking techniques to craft them. Each maker really want to infuse their own distinctive style through the grapes that they use and the oak treatment, etc. So you'll find a much greater variety between different Prestige Cuvées than between entry-level non-vintage champagnes. Just like there's less difference between two cheap cars and between two luxury brands that are going to have really distinctive features. Does that make sense? Just to simplify and to give you an image in mind. Now, Prestige Cuvées tend to be vintage champagnes as well, because champagne makers want to highlight the specificity of a particularly good, a fantastic year. They're made only in fantastic years. And because connoisseurs buying them like to have a feel for those fantastic vintages as well. And I'll send you to that other video that I made about vintage versus non-vintage champagne to understand further what I mean here. So Prestige Cuvées are connoisseurs' wines, distinctive, expensive, refined, exclusive, the concentration of the best grapes and the best craftsmanship from a particular house or grower. Possibly they are the best champagnes, but they do take some understanding and experience with champagne to be understood, and that's why many do find ridiculous perhaps their prices, or they don't understand why they sell for so much money. But this we find with any category of very fine wines. And let's get this name out of the way for sure. Dom Pérignon is the most famous of all Prestige Cuvée champagnes, perhaps the most famous name in Champagne, full stop, maybe after Moet and Chandon, which is the name of the house, of the winery that makes it. Moet is by far the biggest producer of champagne, and perhaps subsequently Dom Pérignon is probably, I think, the highest volume Prestige Cuvée that is made, even though we don't exactly know how many bottles are exactly made, but probably in the several millions. That's probably a safe assumption. It is obviously named after the famous Benedictine monk who improved the method by which wine is made to sparkle, and that helped with the brand's huge marketing power in making this brand, Dom Pérignon, the most recognized Prestige Cuvée. It is a very good champagne, but there's no reason not to try others to find out more about their different styles and respective qualities. Other of the top names in this world include Louis Roederer's Cristal, of course, with its transparent bottle and its absence of punt at the bottom of the bottle, so no one could hide any explosive device in it so as to satisfy the Tsar of Russia at the time. Also goes the story. Armand de Brignac Ace of Spades, made by Drapier, is newer but very fashionable brand, especially in the US. Dom Ruinart is the Prestige Cuvée of Ruinart, another historic house owned by the same Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy luxury group that owns Dom Pérignon, so another powerful brand name, as is La Grande Dame by Veuve Clicquot, also same owner. Arguably, those may well be the strongest Prestige Cuvée names with a bigger global fame. But every house has its Prestige Cuvée. Really, all are worth tasting if you can afford it, as again they are all fantastic crafts and demonstrations of the savoir-faire of their makers. Let's quote here La Grande Année by Bollinger, for example, Amour de Dutz, Laurent Perrier Grand Siècle, Mum de Cramant, La Belle Époque by Perrier-Jouët, Paul Roget's Cuvée Sir Winston Churchill, and Tétinger's Comte de Champagne, just to name a few of the big houses. I'll add that the top cuvées made by smaller producers or grower champagnes, also called champagne vignerons, are just as interesting, if not more, and generally just as well crafted, in smaller volumes, that's for sure. And perhaps they're not always going to be, maybe not all of them, perhaps they're not going to be as refined, but they could certainly be with authenticity, balance, great complexity, and it's always the best expression of a producer, so don't be shy to explore beyond the huge brands. And a series about champagne wouldn't be complete without a few words on the 31 Clos vineyards of Champagne. Not that many people talk about them, understand walled vineyards and their respective fascinating single vineyard champagne approaches. There are 31 officially recognized and designated walled vineyards allowed to call themselves and feature the name Clos on their bottles. Each of them have their own name, somewhat like the Grand Crus, some Grand Crus in Burgundy. Those are small vineyards surrounded by a wall, and often that's because they were identified a long time ago as producing exceptional grapes for making great champagnes, so they were protected by those walls if you wish. Most producers who own a Clos bottle them on their own, against the almost sacred art of blending that is applied otherwise so systematically in champagne. Those are single vineyard wines, made almost in garden vineyards, that's a term that's often used, from grapes grown with extreme attention to detail. Most are therefore fascinating wines that haven't been sleeked by the mixing of different things together, they just come as they do, and it's fascinating to taste. Going towards more single vineyard expressions has a name actually that you must have in mind. It's called the terroirist movement, and it is a thing you must know about. Those wines are very rare as well. There isn't many single vineyard wines coming out of Champagne outside of these Clos. Because generally speaking, only these prestigious Clos vineyards command enough recognition from their names to drive enough image and sales to be bottled on their own. It's pretty much as simple as that. So Clos wines aren't necessarily the best ones, but they are perhaps the most interesting ones to taste. Or say once you've tasted everything else, you want to taste the details of Champagne down to the vineyard level. And that's why those single vineyard wines are so demanded and scarce. Olivier Krug, who runs the famous Krug house, obviously says, talking about single vineyard versus blended champagnes, for me, it is like comparing a soloist and an orchestra. Both have the capacity to be absolutely wonderful, but in their own unique ways. It's a beautiful quote. So I'm not going to quote the 31 different Clos vineyards here. The list is very easy to find online. You can just go and Google it. But let's mention a few of the most famous ones, illustrious ones here. Of course, there's Krug's Clos du Mesnil and Clos d'Ambonnet, 100% Chardonnay and 100% Pinot Noir, respectively. Two of the most illustrious and expensive champagnes, full stop. Now, Bilcar-Salmon Clos Saint-Hilaire is also very prestigious. You've got Philippona Clos des Goisses, the Clos du Moulin by Champagne-Cattier, the one that I've got right here. You've got the Clos Saint-Jacques by Bollinger, Clos Faubourg Notre-Dame by Veuve Fourny. I visited this, it's fantastic. And Clos Lançon are just a few of the very famous names to look out for here. And I'll finish by saying that it doesn't have to be a Clos to be a single vineyard champagne. Some often small producers may choose to bottle some vineyards separately because they're so unique and they want to highlight them. Comes to mind here Bollinger's Vieille Vigne Française as a famous illustrious example, or even a cuvée such as Les Aventures by small craftsman house that I personally love, that is called Ayard Le Noble. Here at Alti Wine Exchange we listed an incredible champagne as well that is one of the most exclusive names in the region, called Burle and Croft. This is one of the rarest, most expensive and best champagne wines without a doubt. So if that's of your interest, we have its detailed story in a full video that the owner of the brand told me personally when I met him. This is a fascinating interview. And then there's so many wonders that I can't quote them all here. So let's leave it here for today. This is the end of our exploration of Champagne for now. We might get back to it at some point. If you haven't watched the other 5 episodes dedicated to the French sparkling wines from Champagne, you can catch up on the different facets that we've explored. I'll link to the complete series at the end. There's also on this channel complete series, 5-6 episode series about Bordeaux and Burgundy wine if you enjoy learning the secrets of the finest wines on earth. It's all here and available for free for you, so why not? And we'll keep going with more regions and countries coming up very soon. So make sure to stay tuned to the channel, like and share this video to support if you've enjoyed it and you have friends that might enjoy it as well. And I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers. Santé.